Eggs have been described as nature's perfect food. They contain just about all the nutrients you need, and they contain them in a ratio that's best for your body. When you consider the price of eggs and the nutrients you get, it's really the best deal in the grocery store. But there are health concerns about eating too many eggs. Eating eggs with other food can actually improve the nutrients you absorb. So for example, if you take a hard-boiled egg and put it in your salad, you will absorb more vitamin E from your salad than you do without the egg. The other benefit for eggs is that they tend to make you feel fuller longer. So you eat less food and your diet is easier. First we'll look at the health and nutrition aspect, and then we'll look at some other myths. And finally, I'll give you my recipe for the easiest pickled eggs in the world. Myth number 1. Are brown eggs more nutritious than white eggs? Simple answer, no they're not. The color of the eggshell has nothing to do with the nutrition inside. The nutrition inside an egg has more to do with the feed that was given to that chicken. As it turns out, white chickens lay white eggs. Brown chickens lay brown eggs. And there are even blue chickens that lay blue eggs, although it's not a really dark blue. And there's even speckled eggs. They all have the same nutrition. I first wrote about this myth in my book, Food Science for Gardeners, and it's full of all kinds of other information regarding the nutrition of food. Myth number 2, you shouldn't eat the yolks, just eat the egg whites. The yolk contains most of the fat in the egg and most of the protein. It's also high in some of the vitamins, including A, D, E, and K. And it's one of the few foods that give you natural vitamin D. It also contains more calcium, copper, iron, manganese, phosphorus, selenium, and zinc than the whites. Now, the color of the yolk depends very much on the food that the chicken ate. But in general, a darker yolk contains more nutrients. However, the yolks also get darker as the egg ages. The egg white, also called albumin, contains more than half of the egg's total protein, a majority of the egg's niacin, riboflavin, magnesium, potassium, and sodium, but it has none of the fat. The yolk and the whites contain different nutrients, but together they make a perfect food. So you should eat both parts. Myth number 3. The egg whites are healthier for you than the yolks. Based on the information I've just given you, they're not healthier. They're just different than the yolks. Myth number 4. Specialty eggs are more nutritious. And I'm using the term specialty eggs to include organic eggs, free-range eggs, pasture-raised eggs, any eggs that are grown differently than our standard commercial egg. As far as macronutrients go, there's no difference between the different types of eggs. But there can be a difference in micronutrients. So let's have a closer look at these various types of nutrients. The macronutrients include protein, calories, and the fat. An egg contains about 6 grams of protein in a large egg, 70 to 80 calories, and about 5 grams of fat. And as I mentioned, these numbers are about the same in all types of eggs. The micronutrients of specialty eggs, like organic and free range, can be a little different. Omega-3 fatty acids, which are important to get in our diet, may contain 2 to 3 times as much than in conventional eggs. Some studies have shown that specialty eggs have higher amounts of vitamin A, E, and D. And they may also have higher levels of antioxidants. But of course, we have to remember that these specialty eggs also cost 2 to 3 times as much. Myth number 5. Chickens are fed hormones to make them grow faster and produce more eggs. That's simply not true. For one reason, it's actually illegal in many countries to use hormones to grow those eggs. But there's a more practical reason. Putting the hormone into the chicken food doesn't really work. It doesn't get absorbed by their bodies. The only way to give the hormone to the chickens is with a daily injection. Now, if you've ever seen these farms with thousands and thousands of chickens, can you imagine what it would cost to inject every one every day? It's just not practical. Myth number 6. Never eat more than 2 eggs a week. If we go back to the 30s, 40s, and 50s, people were eating lots of eggs. In the US, they pretty much had them for breakfast every day. Then we started seeing an increase in health problems. And so research was started to look at why we're having all these heart problems. And it was concluded that our cholesterol level in the blood was too high. Well, it turns out that eggs have a fair amount of cholesterol in them. So the recommendation went out to everyone, stop eating those eggs. They're not good for you. They're killing you. As a result of this, people started recommending that you eat no more than 2 eggs a week. More recent studies have shown that the eggs actually aren't the problem here. In fact, the McMaster University study looked at several other studies, and together they were looking at 146,000 individuals, and they found that eating an egg a day does not change the cholesterol level in your blood. It doesn't cause heart condition. So that's the new recommendation. An egg a day, 7 eggs a week is just fine. And by the way, if you're interested in the studies I reference in my videos, I always put a link to those in my articles. And the Reality Time articles are done on Substack. And I put a link to Substack in the description so you can get the links. Myth number 7. Eggs contain a lot of cholesterol, and that's bad for you. It turns out that eggs do have a fair amount of cholesterol in them, about 200 milligrams per large egg. But we've learned something important about cholesterol. When we eat food with cholesterol in it, the cholesterol is absorbed into our body, but it goes into our muscles and into our body tissues. Very little of the dietary cholesterol ends up in the blood. Now, it turns out our bodies are also able to make cholesterol. And when we make too much cholesterol, that cholesterol ends up in our bloodstream. And that's what's causing the heart condition. So it's important that we eat a diet that doesn't cause our bodies to create cholesterol. But the cholesterol in foods like eggs doesn't do that. And that's why cholesterol in your food is not considered an issue. In fact, there have been a few studies that suggest that eating more cholesterol actually reduces the amount of bad cholesterol, the LDL, that your body makes. So there may actually be some benefits to eating eggs as far as your heart is concerned. Myth number 8. Raw eggs are healthier for you. The claim is that eating raw eggs and things like smoothies and various shakes is good for you. The egg hasn't been processed by any kind of cooking, and so people assume that that's healthier. The actual truth is that cooked eggs are better for you. So one of the reasons we eat eggs is to get the protein. It turns out that in raw eggs, the protein is not very digestible. It's not what we call bioavailable. So we eat it, it goes through our gut system, and a good part of it comes out the other end. When we cook the egg, the cooking process changes the structure of the protein and makes it more digestible. Now, when we eat a cooked egg, our bodies are able to extract almost all the protein out of it. So we actually get a bigger benefit that way. Cooked eggs are a little bit safer as far as salmonella goes. This is a bacteria that's quite toxic to us, and cooking destroys the salmonella. Now, this isn't a big problem in eggs anyways, at least not in developed countries, but there is some safety margin by cooking your eggs. So should you be eating smoothies with raw eggs in it, or ice cream, or eggnog? Yeah, go ahead and eat those things. There's nothing wrong with it. You just have to understand that you're not getting all of the protein benefits that you would get if those were cooked. But between you and me, I'm not going to start cooking my ice cream. All right, there you have it. Those are the nutritional myths. Now let's go look at some other myths about eggs. Myth number 9. Putting eggshells in your garden is beneficial. For most gardeners, eggshells add nothing to your garden. There's this belief that the eggshells decompose and release all the calcium in them, but that doesn't happen unless your soil is very acidic. Once your pH is down below 4.5, the calcium does decompose. As long as the pH of your soil is higher, the eggshells just sit there. Now what happens is that they're fairly fragile, so they break up into smaller and smaller pieces until you no longer see them and you think they've dissolved, but they haven't. On a chemical basis, they're still sitting there in huge chunks and the calcium's all tied up. Plants can't get to it. Now, I did a very interesting study where I actually took the eggshells and I buried them. And then every year for 5 years, I dug some of these up and had a look at them to see how much decomposition took place. And after 5 years, the eggshell itself was still intact. Now, eggshells have an inner liner, a kind of a skin. Now, that's mostly protein, and that decomposes very quickly. But the calcium is in the outer shell, and after 5 years, it looks like nothing touched it. Now, my pH is about 7.4, so I wasn't surprised. If you're interested in that study, you can have a look at my blog, gardenmyths.com, where I describe it, and I'll put a link to it in the description. I've also written an article about how to make your own DIY CalMag. And there what we do is we take eggs and vinegar and we digest it before we put it in the garden. I'll put a link to that too. Myth number 10. Blood spots on the yolk of an egg indicate a fertilized egg. So normally when you crack an egg, the egg yolk is quite yellow and you don't see the blood spots. Every once in a while you will get some with blood spots. And people freak out about those. They think this is a baby chick that's starting to grow, and many people throw out the egg. Well, don't do that. It does not indicate a fertilized egg. In fact, there's nothing wrong with eating the blood spot. Perfectly healthy for you. Now, you're more likely to see blood spots if you buy your eggs from a farmer. But with our modern techniques for processing eggs, anything with blood spots are generally identified in the scanning process and they're removed and they're used to manufacture other products that need egg. They're not sold that way. Myth number 11. Don't eat eggs during pregnancy. Now the concern here is not so much for the mother but for the baby. Babies can have a different allergy than the mothers, and egg allergy in babies is fairly common. So the concern is that if you eat the egg while you're pregnant, the baby will actually react to that. That's really not a concern. That doesn't happen. There's also a concern that if the mother eats eggs during pregnancy, there's a higher risk of an egg allergy in the baby. And that's also not true. Once the baby starts eating solid food, it's quite safe to give them eggs, and you can start off by giving them small amounts of egg. We now know that it's better to give these kinds of foods to babies when they're younger and get them conditioned to the food. If you keep the eggs away from the babies until they're quite a bit older, they actually have a higher chance of developing egg allergy. And that's true of other types of allergy. Myth number 12. Washing eggs eliminates salmonella poisoning. Again, this is the bacteria, and the bacteria creates toxic substances that are very harmful to us. Well, the story here is much more complicated. There is one type of salmonella that is very toxic and is found in eggs, but it's generally found in the inside of the egg. It actually becomes part of the egg inside the chicken's ovary. That's the salmonella we're really concerned about. In the modern culture of chickens, this is really no longer a problem. We make sure that the chickens don't have salmonella, and therefore the eggs won't have salmonella. Now, if we're talking about this type of bacteria, washing the outside of the egg will have no effect on the safety of the egg. However, there are other types of salmonella bacteria, and those types are generally found on the outside of the egg. Now, in commercial eggs that you get from a grocery store, it's generally not a problem because they've been cleaned, and in fact, they're covered with an oily coating that keeps the bacteria from growing there. And washing the eggs can actually be detrimental because you're washing that oil off, and now the pores in the egg are more exposed to bacteria, and there's a higher chance of infection from bacteria. So it's actually not a good idea to wash your eggs. So what about washing eggs from local farmers or backyard eggs that you're growing yourself? Should you wash those? Well, it turns out you shouldn't wash those either. See, eggs have a natural coating on them called the bloom, and that bloom protects the egg from bacterial infection. When you wash the egg, you wash that off, and therefore you're more likely to get an infection. Now, I guess if the egg is really dirty and has chicken poop all over it, you might want to wash that off. But in general, if the egg is fairly clean, you don't have to wash it. You're not going to eat the outside of the shell anyway. Myth number 13. The float test will tell you whether an egg is safe to eat. Now the test goes something like this. You take your egg and put it in a glass of water. A fresh egg sinks to the bottom. If the egg is slightly old, it will sink to the bottom, but it tends to stand up on end. Once the egg is too old to eat, it will float, and you should discard it. Well, it turns out this test doesn't work. What happens with the egg is that when it's fresh, it has a very small air pocket inside, and so it sinks. As the egg ages, it loses moisture and it absorbs air. So that air pocket gets larger and larger, and at some point it stands upright in the water. As the egg gets older, even more air goes inside, and it gets to the point where the air pocket is so big that it actually lifts the eggs to the surface of the water. So the water test is a way to tell how old an egg is, but it doesn't tell you whether it's safe to eat. The best way to test whether an egg is safe to eat is to crack it open and smell it. If it smells fresh and smells like an egg, it's good to eat. If you crack it open and you have a pungent odor, smells rotten, don't eat it. Myth number 14. Boiled eggs are hard to peel. Now, a great way to eat eggs is by boiling them, because then they're readily available. You can grab one at any time, peel it, and snack on it, or add it to a sandwich or a salad. So we always keep some boiled eggs in the fridge. The problem with boiled eggs is peeling the darn things. Now, this has been researched quite extensively, and what we know about eggs is that when they're very fresh, they don't peel very well. The inner skin sticks to both the shell and the egg white, and it sticks those things together so you can't peel it. As the egg ages, and it only takes a few days, that stickiness of the inner membrane decreases, and you reach a point where you can peel it quite easily. Now, most commercial eggs are already a week or two old by the time you pick them up from the grocery store. In fact, I read one post that said in the US they can be 4 to 6 weeks old before you get them in the grocery store. By the time you buy those kinds of eggs, you can boil them and they should be easy to peel. Now, if you buy farm fresh eggs, or you're getting your own eggs from the backyard, it's a good idea to put them in the fridge for 3-4 days before you boil them, and that will make them easier to peel. Now, there's a lot of other myths out there about things you can do in the boiling process to make the eggs easier to peel, and most of those don't work. So adding things like vinegar and salt, you can put the eggs into hot water, or you can put them into cold water and heat them up. You can rinse them in hot water, rinse them in cold water, let them sit in hot water. Most of those techniques don't make any difference to the peel. In fact, at one point, I got a list of all of these, put them all together in one method, and finally got a method that worked where I could boil eggs and peel them easily. And then slowly I would take one of those things off the list. And I ended up with all of them off the list. And the only thing I found was that if eggs sat in the fridge too long, they became hard to boil. Now that actually contradicts all of the science that I've been able to find. So I'm going to retest this, but I'm convinced that if you try to boil eggs that have been in the fridge for 3 weeks, they're difficult to boil. What I do now is I go to the store, buy the eggs, and within a day or two, I boil them, and I haven't had any problems since. I just put them in a pot, add some water, boil them, rinse them, peel them right away. They're easy to peel. Now I'd like to give you my secret for the best pickled egg recipe in the world. Now, it may not make the best tasting pickles, but it's the easiest recipe I could find. So I also like pickles. So I get my jar of pickles, I eat the pickles, and when I'm done the pickles, I keep the jar with all the juice in it in the fridge. Next time I boil eggs, I peel them and take the peeled eggs and put them in the jar. That's it. That's my recipe. That makes really good pickled eggs. You do have to keep an eye on the vinegar level. The eggs will absorb the acetic acid from the vinegar, and the pH will come down. And you can tell that easily. Just stick your finger in there and taste it. If you don't taste vinegar, you don't have enough acid in the water. So just top it up with some vinegar. So every 2 or 3 weeks I test them. If it needs more vinegar, I throw some in. Provided you keep the pH low You won't get any bacteria growing in those pickles. I hope this information has been helpful. Eggs are good for you. You should be eating one a day. And with today's food prices, it's one of the best bargains in the grocery store. Happy cooking. You can find Reality Time on YouTube, Substack, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. I'll put links to these and our social pages in the description below. If you're interested in gardening, check out my YouTube channel called Garden Fundamentals or my blog called Garden Myths. Let the truth shine into your life.